I have always been fascinated with Vietnam and felt that it was a seminal event in our nation's history, and welcomed the idea to do a film about the last days of Vietnam. But I felt that Vietnam has been so covered by documentaries and books, and I didn't know if I could add anything new to the equation. And I think a lot of us are familiar with the iconic image of the helicopter coming off of what we think is the embassy. It's not, in fact, the embassy, as we all now know. That was really what I know, right? And there was so much I didn't know. And once I uncovered the events and how dramatic they were and how extraordinary they were, I was kind of blown away about how much I didn't know. And then when we started uncovering these extraordinary stories of Stuart Herrington and the USS Kirk and people, Americans and Vietnamese, who went against U.S. policy to sacrifice themselves and to save the lives of the Vietnamese, then I was really hooked. And I think I also was excited about this film because of the timeliness. At that point, we were on the brink of getting out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and I felt, even though these were events that took place 40 years ago, they have a lot of resonance today. There are images coming out of Iraq where families are desperately trying to get on American helicopters, and it feels like Saigon 40 years ago.
The story itself is, just in its DNA, is this amazingly dramatic story. It has this structure that is, it's almost, like a disaster film, where the tsunami's coming, or the bad guys are coming, and there's a ticking clock, and everybody has to try and get out. And so, we had that to start with. And, we wrote up a treatment, and it was a very brief document because it came across really quickly how, engaging and compelling and terrifying a story it would be.
Well, I must say I was quite astounded after we opened this marvelous film that this marvelous lady made at the Sundance Film Festival. And the audience was a sizable audience, young and old. And they came to me and they said, almost to the voice, "We never knew. We never knew." And it dawned on me that half the people in the audience weren't born at the time, and the other half had focused on Watergate, the Yom Kippur War, the quadrupling of a barrel of crude and the price and the impact on the economy. And that even though this was something that I lived and breathed for the better part of 4 years of my life, it seemed so much different to most people. And one of the things that I really will always be grateful to Rory is that she did a film about those events, which instead of being the woe is me, weeping and gnashing of teeth of how horrible we are as a country, focused on that side, that dimension of the story that normally doesn't get any attention.
We really tried to contain this story to this moment in time, and as much as we could to take the politics out of it. And as Mark said, there's no experts, there's no narrator, there's nobody looking back giving opinions about this moment. It's all the first-hand accounts of what happened. There's nothing that that the film tells you that the people in the film don't know. So you're learning it as they learn it. And so, our hope was that the experience would be as though you were there.
One of my experiences after Vietnam and other wars that I had the misfortune or fortune to be in was that I would always finally get out from wherever it was, whether it was Desert Storm or the invasion of Panama or Vietnam. And then I'd see the coverage of it in the documentaries, and I'd always ask myself, if that was Vietnam, where was I? That said, in this particular one, it brings it home to me with such a vivid realism that even 40 years later, it catches me emotionally. By leaving the commentary and the description of events up to the people who were there, you get something that you rarely find these days, and that is its historicity, its veracity, its absolute verisimilitude.
Do you have any hopes? Do you think there may be any way that this could help to change people's perceptions about, if not the overall legacy, then some of the human impact and the human performances of the time?
I think so, although Vietnam has always been such a contentious issue, and I certainly agree with Rory and Mark that to skirt around the politics of it was the only way to go here. There are still diehard camps of people out there who made up their minds about Vietnam 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they'll probably never change their minds.
I think, kind of in line with what you're saying politically, you know, I sort of, when we finished this film, I looked at it and I thought, gosh, Nixon comes across pretty well in this film, and Kissinger's pretty good, and maybe we shouldn't have gotten out of Vietnam, and, you know, kind of all of these ideas that are very counter to my kind of lefty perspective on things.
In the end, when our policy collapses, and out on the ground are all these people who, because policy decisions were made, were deployed out there. And you can put in here Vietnam, or you can put Iraq or Afghanistan. People are out there to implement these policies. And if the policy is ill thought out, if, as in the case of Vietnam, you grossly underestimate the North Vietnamese and overestimate the South Vietnamese, what you get is what you saw on the screen here. And these human events can really claw at your heart. So to know and to experience war firsthand, or the consequences of a failed war, is to, as a person, get this sense that these policy decisions beget these human events, and this is how it translates on the ground.
One of the lessons that I think I've learned in making this film is that by April of 1975, there were very few good options available. And, you know, had Congress passed the $722 million, I think it would have made a difference. I don't think it would have changed the tide of what happened. So I think the lesson to me is that once you start a war, you can lose control over it. And then you can get into a situation like this quite easily. And so when we're thinking about these engagements with ISIS and going back into Iraq and Syria, I think it's really important, imperative that our leaders answer the questions of what is our exit strategy, what is our plan, what is our responsibility to the people on the ground. Thank you.